All right, let's turn to the book of Exodus, and we're in chapter 21. Wednesday night before last, Exodus 21. Wednesday night before last, we really got stuck in one verse, really one statement in one verse. If you'll look back at verse 13, and if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand. You know, we looked at that powerful statement to recognize that God's sovereignty is over life and death. A death may be accidental from man's point of view, but nothing happens outside of the providence of God. Tonight I want to return to the flow of the passage. If not, we're going to be stuck in Exodus for years. We've got to move a little faster than we're moving. But we're looking at laws. The Ten Commandments give us the moral foundation of the law of God, but now God is giving to Moses specific laws and how the Ten Commandments are to be laid out in everyday life. Sort of like case law in our land today. As we study each case, we're asking four questions. What happened? What judgment does God require? Who does the law protect? And what is the lasting principle that this law is teaching us about who the Lord is? Let's pick up in verse 14. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. Now, verse 13 is dealing with a man who is not lying in wait. In other words, it's death that occurs by accident. But in verse 14, he's talking about premeditated, intentional murder, a deliberate death. Here's a man that thinks about it, he acts deceitfully, and he sets out to kill his neighbor. So God, first of all, makes a clear distinction between accidental death and premeditated murder. And that distinction lies beneath lies, if you will, in our modern understanding of homicide. We've touched on this before. But today, if a death occurs, the question has to be proven. Was it intentional? Was it planned? Was there malice involved? Was there reckless behavior involved if it's an accidental death? So God's law did not treat every death alike because every death did not involve the same degree of guilt. And there's a lot of people that don't understand that today. Think if a death occurs, then it's murder. It's not always murder. And it's not always first-degree murder. Sometimes it can be second-degree murder. Sometimes it can just be simply homicide. But notice the phrase, thou shalt take him from mine altar. What does that mean? Thou shalt take him from mine altar. Well, in Bible days, if a man was running for his life or pleading for mercy, he could run to the altar of God. Matter of fact, there's a couple of instances in the Bible where people ran and put their hands upon the horns of the altar. Adonijah was an instance. He was one who feared Solomon. He was one of David's sons, and as David grew old and weak, Adonijah attempted to seize the throne for himself, even though God had specifically chosen Solomon to succeed David. Adonijah gathered supporters, and he held a coronation feast, and he exalted himself as king without David's authorization. When David publicly declared Solomon king and had him anointed right before his death, Adonijah's attempt then collapsed. His supporters all scattered, and he has suddenly realized that he might be treated as a rebel against the rightful king. And 1 Kings 1:50 says, Adonijah feared because of Solomon, and he rose and went and caught hold on the horns of the altar. Now, he wasn't fleeing because he'd murdered someone, but he was fleeing for something that was pretty serious. He had not shed the innocent blood like Joab, who was our second story, did. But because he had gone to the altar, Solomon showed him some conditional mercy. We read in 1 Kings 1:52, Solomon said, if he will show himself a worthy man, there shall not a hair of him fall to the earth. But if wickedness shall be found in him, he shall die. So he gave him a chance. Now, you well know in ancient times, if someone threatened the throne, that usually meant what? Death. You were going to be executed, family member or not. But he ran to the altar and he grabbed the horns, and Solomon showed him mercy. Another instance is Joab. Y'all remember the story of Joab? The Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 28, Joab fled unto the tabernacle of the Lord and caught hold on the horns of the altar. Problem is, this time it didn't work. You see, his case was a little different. Joab had deliberately shed innocent blood. During David's reign, he murdered Abner, the commander of Saul's army. Abner had come in peace to Hebron after negotiating with David, but Joab lured him aside under the pretense of speaking privately with him, and he stabbed him in revenge for the death of his brother Asahel. Later, Joab also murdered Amasa. David had appointed Amasa to command the army in Joab's place, and Joab greeted him as though he were a friend. You remember, he took him by the beard as if to kiss him, and then he struck him with a concealed sword, and he killed him with deceit. So both men were killed treacherously and without any lawful justification. So when Joab ran to the altar, what happened? The Bible says the king said unto him, Do as he hath said, and fall upon him, and bury him, that thou mayest take away the innocent blood which Joab shed from me and from the house of my father. And the Lord shall return his blood upon his own head, who fell upon 2 more righteous men better than he. So Joab is almost a living illustration of what Exodus 21 verse 14 says. He can run to the altar, but that's not going to save him. It's not going to protect him. God is merciful and he is gracious, but there are still consequences to sin that's committed here on this earth. So though the altar was a place of mercy, it was not a place where justice could be defeated. The altar could not be used as a loophole for murder. And that's what he means when he says in verse number 14, Thou shalt take him from mine altar, that he may die. Any questions, comments? All right, verse 15. And he that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Now, the word smite doesn't necessarily mean kill, right? Obviously, verse 13 would cover, if we're talking about murder, it wouldn't be necessary to say father or mother or a family member. It would just, that verse 13 would have covered it all. But he says, He that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Fast forward to verse 17. He that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So verse 15 deals with striking a parent. Verse 17 deals with cursing a parent. But I want you to know that the word cursing there is more than just out of anger, saying something irate or ugly. The word curse translates from the Hebrew verb kalal, and it carries the idea of treating someone with contempt. Dishonoring them or calling down evil upon them is literally what the language means. To curse someone. We can see the seriousness of the term in passages such as Leviticus 24:15, where cursing God is treated as a grave offense. In Proverbs 20, verse 20, it warns, Whoso curseth his father or his mother, his lamp shall be put out in obscure darkness. So it's not just a moment of foolish frustration where a child, might say something ugly. This has a deep-rooted issue of the heart. But the point I want to make out of these two things is that God takes authority seriously. What commandment does this flow out of? Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Now, Jesus said that's a commandment with promise. But I thought about this today as I was reading over this. He says, honor your father and your mother that your days may be long. I can see why your days wouldn't be long if you didn't honor them. Because what was the punishment for breaking that law? Death. Capital punishment. God treats rebellion against parents so seriously that he said the penalty is death. Why do you think that's true? Why do you think the Lord's so serious about the way parents are treated? I have my opinion, I'll tell you what it is. I believe because God knows that the foundation to society is the family. And the family's foundation is the marriage. The root of authority, you're born into this world under the authority of your mother and your dad. And every other authority in society, every other structure of society today flows out of that. The family is the building block of every other organization. Matter of fact, we wouldn't have a church if it wasn't made up of what? Families. Families are the building block of the church. So before a child learns to respect judges or police officers or rulers, or in this instance, priests in Israel, he had to first learn to respect his parents and the authority in his home. If all authority is mocked in the home, then disorder eventually will spread where? Into the whole community. Why do you think the Lord would say put them to death? Because if they're going to be that kind of rebels to their parents, they'll rebel against all other authority. And when you have rebellion, you have anarchy. You have a society that collapses. Are we seeing some of that today? Now, that doesn't mean parents are always right.
I'm sitting here thinking about some evil parents that I want to read about.
There we go.
Evil.
All right. So what about parents that are evil? It does not mean an adult child must participate in their parents' sins, or even a young child as a Christian. I know of some young people who've come to know the Lord, and their mom and daddies are not believers, and their mom and dads are involved in wicked activity. We're not going to go too deep into this because we covered some of this when we studied the Ten Commandments. I think all it means is that a father and a mother occupy a position God commands children to honor. And even in the New Testament, we're told if we're under the authority of a master, we're not to be in subjection to only those that are good and righteous, but even to those that are evil and unjust. Up to the point where we have to make a choice to honor them or the Lord. The only excuse we have to say no or to stand in opposition to authority that God has put over our life is when that authority is going in opposition to God's will and authority. Right? Romans 13 even teaches that. I don't care who the president is. I was taught as a child, you respect that office. There's been some presidents, I'm glad they're gone. But I was never allowed as a child to speak evil of a dignitary. The Bible teaches that. Did you know that? You're not to speak evil of authority. Even if they're wicked, they're unjust. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. What's sad today is that there are young people that are taught you only respect authority as long as you agree with that authority, as long as you like that authority. But when you don't like the call that umpire made, then you can stand up and act like a fool even at a t-ball game. That's wrong. You're teaching your child the very opposite of what the Bible teaches them. If you're teaching them as a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old to disrespect an umpire at a t-ball game, you will eventually teach them to disrespect any authority that's over their life in the future, whether that be a judge or a police officer or anyone else who God's, or a boss, leader. We're seeing that today. I don't have to agree with the authority or even like the authority to still respect that authority and to see through the person and see that ultimately it's not just the authority of your mom and dad that you're disrespecting. Ultimately it's the authority of God, because who gave your mom and dad that authority? Who gave the judge and government their authority? Who gave law enforcement their authority? So sadly today what we're seeing is a breaking down of culture and society. And we've even seen some of it just in the last few days. Simply because it begins in the home. Jesus quoted this very law when he said, "For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and thy mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death." Paul repeated the commandment in Ephesians 6 when he said, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Even though we're not living under Israel's civil penalties, boy, there'd be a lot of capital punishment going on if we were. But the moral principle still remains. God expects children to honor their parents. There are some modern parallels to this. One of the things that I wanted to do as we studied God's laws is to see how our laws today are found, and the principles and the foundation of those laws are found from the book of Exodus. I'm in law enforcement, as you know, And as a matter of fact, modern law gives special attention to violence when it's within a family. Assault does not become less serious because it occurs behind closed doors or it involves close relatives. In some ways, it becomes more serious. In Mississippi, for instance, domestic violence. Y'all ever heard the term domestic violence? It happens a lot. Domestic violence generally applies only when the alleged victim is a current or a former spouse or a person with whom the offender shares a child, a current or former partner, a family member, brother, sister. It has to be a certain relationship. In other words, I could show up at a fight as a law enforcement officer and it just be two friends. And that's not considered domestic violence. Domestic violence is laws that apply to family members. And here's why I say in some ways it's more serious. A police officer has what we call, what's the term? Discretionary authority. We can exercise discretion in many criminal investigations. Just because there's a law in place, it does not require me to make an arrest or to write a ticket. I have discretion to let that person go based upon the authority been given to me. But when it comes to domestic violence, it's a different story. Matter of fact, it's one of the few laws on state books that does not say may arrest, it says shall arrest. So when an officer has probable cause to believe that a qualifying domestic violence has occurred, even though it's a crime that's not been done in my presence, the law strongly states that an arrest shall be made. In practice, officers must still determine whether the probable cause exists and identify the aggressor. We do that by looking at evidence, marks, whatever the case might be, hearing both sides of the story. We determine who the aggressor is and who the victim in that case would be. Sometimes it's both. You just take them both to jail. And I've seen that. But I can't just walk away from that and say I used officer discretion and I didn't make an arrest. Because in Mississippi, violence that happens within the family is treated more harshly. I think that comes from biblical principle. The Bible doesn't say if you strike a man, you'll be put to death, but if you strike your father and your mother, you die. That's capital punishment. What does that reveal about God? It reveals to us that He protects society by protecting family. He protects parents from violent rebellion, and elsewhere He protects children from oppression and abuse. He does not allow the home to become a place where people can attack without consequences. Any question, any comment? Verse 16, he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. We've touched on this one already, so we won't spend a lot of time there, but what do we call that today? Modern human trafficking or kidnapping. Okay, we have laws in our books that deal with that very thing. God condemned the stealing of a human being. If the offender was guilty, notice whether he had sold the victim or the stolen property or the person was still found in his possession. Read that again. He that stealeth the man and selleth him. In other words, he's already sold him, he's gone, but if evidence proves that he had stolen him to begin with, even if he's not in his possession, it's still capital punishment. Deuteronomy 24:7 says, if a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel and maketh merchandise of him or selleth him, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put away evil from among you. In my opinion, it's a shame that the punishment for kidnapping and human trafficking is not capital punishment today. It ought to be. And I'll tell you why. If it were, I don't believe we would have the problems that we do today. The Bible repeatedly teaches that punishment serves not only to deal with the person who committed the crime, but it also serves as a deterrent to society. For example, Deuteronomy 19:20 says, and those which shall remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you. seeing serious punishment has a way of deterring people from doing certain crimes, doesn't it? And when our justice system minimizes the penalties, then you give no person with evil in their heart any motivation to not commit the crime. I promise you, human trafficking is a bigger problem in America than anybody probably realizes, except for those that are on the front line dealing with it. There's more kidnapping and human trafficking going on than you could even imagine. What's sad is that it seems not to be a big deal to our government. In my opinion, all the billions of dollars that we're sending trying to put out fires across the world need to be spent trying to rescue people and children and women in our country. And then when those people are found, they need to be executed, and swiftly. And it may not stop it completely, but it would certainly make it less than what's going on in our country today. All right, let's move on. Verse number 18. And if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed. What does that mean? He hurts him so bad that he's what? He's bedridden. That's what it means, he keepeth his bed. In other words, it doesn't kill him, but it permanently injures him. Then, verse 19, if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. It's pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? That's workman's comp. So here's two men fighting, and maybe they're both agreeing to fight. I don't know. They get into a fight. One picks up a rock or he hits him with his fist, and he injures him to the point that he doesn't die. But he's confined to a bed. He's injured severely. If the injured man recovers and is able to walk again, the offender won't be treated as a murderer. But he's not free from his responsibility. He must pay for the injured man's lost time and the expense of his healing. He's got to pay for his medical bills. That's what it means when it says he shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. It's not that the person who does the injury can do the healing, but he's got to make sure that he's responsible for whatever medical bills are there. So that's a major biblical principle. The offender is responsible for the actual damage he caused. It's not enough for him to say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it, or I lost my temper. The injured man now faces what happens when you're in bed. You can't work. There's income that you need to provide for your family. And therefore, the man who injured him is required to make the loss good. How do we see that in modern law today? It's called criminal restitution and civil damage. And that can include medical expenses. It can include rehabilitation costs, lost wages, damaged property. That all comes from the principle of God's Word. There's a spiritual application. In my opinion, real repentance seeks to make matters right when possible. In other words, it shouldn't be that a judge just forces it to happen. I think a person who knows they're guilty should want to make restitution. Who in the Bible, as soon as he repented, said, I'll make restitution? Wasn't even told he had to. He was a little short man. Zacchaeus. I knew who you meant. Zacchaeus. Remember, he stood and he said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Any comment? Again, what does this reveal about God? It reveals that God does not forget the injured person while only concentrating on the offender. God's justice not only says what should happen to the guilty, but it also says what must be done for the innocent, for the injured, for the person that was hurt. That comes from the heart of God. So our laws, we understand, are founded upon the principles of God's heart. Verse 20. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, what reason would a person have to smite his servant or his maid with a rod? Here again, we're getting into ground that's difficult for us in our society to understand, but remember in Bible days, older society, slavery, servitude was not illegal. It was allowed for. But remember in which cases, what cases would that be? Would it be better for you to die of starvation, or if you had nothing else to sell your person and your service to someone who would then provide you a roof over your head and food to eat? And that happened a lot of time in Bible days. Man would sell himself just for simple survival. Or if you were a captive of war, would you rather be killed or taken as a slave? Okay, so God allowed for it. It wasn't by His design. The Lord never in His design for humanity, I believe, ever designed, it wasn't God's perfect will for one man to be Lord over another man or to own a man. Matter of fact, you can't steal a man and sell him. If you do, that's capital punishment. That tells you the heart of God for human liberty. But in instances where a person was either taken as a captive of war or taken and freely sold himself and his person, then there is ownership and there is authority that God recognized. And He recognized that it sometimes, I think when He says here smite, probably a form of punishment. You know? It's hard again for our society to swallow that. But you don't want to go into certain places in Asia right now and get in trouble. I remember years ago the young man from America that went over, was it Thailand or Singapore, somewhere like that, and Singapore, and he stole something or got in some trouble.
He went around and he started scratching cars.
Oh yeah, keying cars and graffiti.
I used to work with the Singapore Airport.
Okay.
A lot of misbehavior. And in their country, the punishment is to be caned.
Yep.
And you don't want it. It's a 6-foot-long bamboo rod split with rubber bands. And the first offense is 4. The next time is 6. The next time is 8, and you're going to the hospital. They just keep going up until you get the message.
I remember when that made headlines here in the States because this poor American boy went over there and got caned. Well, he got punished for doing something he shouldn't have done. And I may be wrong, but I think that's what the Lord is regarding here, is that sometimes there's punishment that's necessary. Sometimes it's a caning. But the master may have possessed authority over a servant, but his authority was not unlimited. And here this law protects that servant, protects that maid, protects that person, because the expression says he shall surely be punished. That's connected with vengeance or judicial punishment. So the servant's death was not dismissed simply because he was a servant. God cares even about the life of a slave or a servant. All human life is precious to God. We need to remember that. Because a lot of times in slavery in societies across the world, a person's just a possession. You know, matter of fact, much of the slavery here in the United States, not every slave owner was cruel and evil and mean and unjust, but many were. And they saw a human life and a slave just as a mere possession. So God put laws in place to protect even them. Let's read it again, verse number 20. If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. What? What does that mean? What reason would a slave owner or a master or a person in authority over a servant or a maid, what reason would he have to kill his servant? If you killed your servant, now you don't have a servant. You just killed your money. He's not talking about for he is his money in the sense that that servant's no more than monetary or dollar bill, same thing as a possession or an equity. What he's saying is that it proves that there was no intent for murder there. In other words, it proves that he did not beat him to the point or punish him to the point where he was trying to kill him, because there would be no motive behind that. In other words, why would you want to kill the thing that's bringing you profit or labor or money, literally? So I think verse 26 through 27 will show that the master could still lose the servant altogether if he permanently injured him. But what this law is distinguishing is the degree of guilt while placing restraint upon the master. What does this reveal about God? It reveals that though a servant may have had less social power, he was not invisible to God. And the master could not say, well, he belongs to me so I can do anything I want to. Nope. God's law did not allow for that. There was no such thing as unlimited authority or unlimited whim or wish that you could do whatever you wanted to and treat a human just as though they were some possession. All right, man, we're already out of time. Let's read real quick, verse 22. No, it's not, because this is a deep one. Let's read it, think about it, and you come back next week and tell me what you think it means. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. And if any mischief follow, then shalt thou give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Does that sound familiar? Many of you ever heard the expression, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? Well, that's where it comes from. Matter of fact, Jesus quotes it later in the book of Matthew. The question I want to ask you, and I want you to think about, is what does it mean if her fruit depart from her? There's two different views from Bible scholars. I have mine, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, because I've got some arguments to make as to why I'm right. Does it mean premature birth or miscarriage? So let's come back, we'll study it next week, and I'll give you my reason, what I believe that it is. Study it, think about it. Any question, any comment? If not, let's stand and be dismissed. Thank you for coming.